How's it going? And welcome to the Creative Endeavour podcast. This is a podcast bringing you inspiring stories from creative professionals from around the world. And in this episode, I'm talking to Lucas Kratochwil, who's an amazing landscape painter based in Canada. And a lot of his work is inspired by the Canadian wilderness. He details his paintings with amazing techniques, and he creates these really photographic, hyper-realistic results. I wanted to find out more about his painting process, but also how he makes it work as a thriving business and hear a little bit about his creative journey as well. This was a great conversation. I certainly enjoyed it, and I hope you will too. So without further ado, here's a Lucas Kratochwil in the Creative Endeavour. Lucas Kratochwil, welcome to the Creative Endeavour podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to meet you. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Now, look, I'm talking to you. You're over in Canada at the moment, and your studio is in Vancouver. Is that right?
Or it's just outside of Vancouver.
Yeah.
It's called Roberts Creek. It's a 40-minute ferry away, and it's more of a rural environment. Very cozy, very laid back, lots of nature. No street lights, just perfect for painting away.
Brilliant. Well, yeah. Look, we have a lot to talk about in this episode, and there's a lot of things that I want to ask you, but why don't we kick things off and just start off with your art and your creative journey. When did you first realize that you wanted to be an artist?
Yeah, well, I was born in Argentina to a family that moved from Austria. And my grandfather was a painter. He did landscapes and portraits. And he has a very interesting story of how he would, throughout the war in Europe, they sent him. He was fairly old when the Second World War started. So they sent him as an outpost to the Alps to report enemy movement. And he wasn't really much into fighting or weapons or anything like that. So he took his little painting kit and he would go anywhere else in the mountains and just paint the Alps. So we have a collection of his paintings from the Alps for the first few years. Then they sent him to the Northern Sea to study waves. So he did a whole bunch of paintings of waves and studying tides and stuff. And then at the end, he was captured by the Russian army that was moving into Germany. And after a few weeks of being entrapped in like a prisoner's camp, he escaped through a little river that was flowing under a fence. And he walked afoot for, I believe it was like 8 months alone through like hostile enemy territory back to Switzerland, where the rest of my family was exiled. And through that time, he was staying at like the only people who had food and shelter were farmers, essentially. So he would stay at farmers' places. And in exchange of food and shelter, he would paint portraits of them. So he made his way through the war painting, essentially, which I think it's fascinating. And goes to show also resourcefulness, right? And after that, he reunited with the family and moved back to Argentina, where he was already living there before the war. And he had just gone back to Europe because he saw hostile climate coming and he wanted to bring his family back. And while he was there, war started and he was enrolled. So he got stuck there, but ended up in Argentina. And then they bought a plot of land in Patagonia. And back then, the government would say, okay, pick as much as you want. The only condition is you have to fence it. And fencing was very expensive. So he got a decent plot of land. And established there and built some cottages. And so my dad grew up in that environment as well. He was born in Argentina. So he grew up very much living in these cottages in Patagonia and learning from my grandfather was doing everything by hand. There was no cell phone or nothing back then, of course. And so everything was done by hand. You had to, anything you wanted, you have to make yourself. Even my grandma would saw the clothes and the tents and everything. And so he grew up like that and learning how to paint and how to just be in nature all day. And then he moved to the city, to Buenos Aires. That's the capital of Argentina. And he was still doing his painting on the side, but he got a full-time job at a company. And I was born later in 1989. And so both my mom and my dad, they come from like a German-speaking background, and so they taught me German as a first kid, and they just bombarded me with artistic stuff. And my mom, who was always into uh, alternative schooling methods and alternative medicine and holistic approaches to just life, she was very keen in sending me to a Waldorf school. I don't know if you have Waldorf schools in New Zealand. It's like an alternative schooling method, like Montessori and stuff like that. But essentially, the emphasis is put in allowing kids to grow on their own time and then really find and develop their talents, or whatever they're good at, whatever their interest is, just go more for it. And putting a lot of creative stuff, painting, music, all of that into it. And so from early on, I just did that, a lot of painting and drawing and sketching and doing music. And there was no TV at home because my parents wanted me to be engaged in just creating stuff. And I absolutely loved it. And so at the beginning, it was just, that's the thing to do. It's just playtime. There's crayons, there's dough, there's clay. And then as, of course, you grow older and I became a teenager, then at some point I was very jealous of all my buddies who had their Game Boys and computers, and I would kind of resent my parents for not allowing me to be normal or whatever. But still, it was so ingrained in me already that I just still loved to just come home, and for 4 hours I would play the guitar. I did a lot of music, like that's a big part of my life as well, or build models, or just draw and paint. And in school I was always the one who was the better at painting, the better at drawing, and I was that was great amongst my friends, and bad against my art teacher, who was always like, "Oh, you're just why don't you stay in line?" Yeah, and then by the end of high school, I was either gonna go fully into music. I had a lot of bands, and I was playing guitar, so either into music or into arts, especially sculpture at the time. I really liked sculpture. I always was drawn to figurative stuff, even if it was surrealistic, like Dali or things like that. That was always like stuff that whenever I saw it, I thought like, wow, like how have they done that? And because those are also the kind of paintings that I grew up seeing at home. Like I had paintings of my grandfather, and he was very old school, trained in Vienna. It was all representational, like landscapes and people, and just beautifully done. And so yeah, I just grew up ingrained in that tradition, and it was never much of a question, right?
You know, it's so cool hearing about like your childhood and your past. I guess I reflected a little bit of that. I was one of those kids as well. I was known as a kid in class that could draw and could paint and do all that stuff. But, you know, looking back on it now, I think it's really interesting because I think my parents had a very similar take on raising children to what your parents had, because we had a television, but not until later. Like I remember a TV coming into the house and being a big deal. And my parents were at the time, and it kind of explains it now, but at the time I was like, why can't I watch this? They're like, no. You get to watch the TV when we say you get to watch the TV. Otherwise, you're going to be painting, drawing, reading, and doing your schoolwork. We're not just going to sit in front of the TV and watch it. And this was what all my friends were doing as a kid. And, you know, they had the Game Boys and all sorts, like the Nintendo 64, the Sega or whatever. And it was such a big deal to go to my friend's house to go and have a go at one of these things. But of course, because I didn't have one, I was rubbish at it. But looking back now, I mean, we got to be grateful for that, right? Because it does ultimately lead you to where you're going to be led. And then also, I think as a kid, being in that kind of environment, it builds this discipline, doesn't it? Because now working towards something that is like a creative goal now suddenly doesn't seem like such a big deal. It's
exactly,
like, oh yeah, this is natural. I can do this. Now, so give me Lucas, give me a snapshot of where you are now. Like I'm speaking to you. So for the people that are listening to the audio version of this podcast, won't be able to see the background, but you're sitting right now in front of one of your magnificent paintings. Maybe tell me a little bit about your work and what inspires you now, and what kind of direction are you going in creatively now?
Yeah, well, this is actually my latest painting. It's called The Perfect Day, and as you see, it's just one of those bluebird days that you get on the top of a mountain. And this is a scene of the top view of Blackcomb Mountain, looking at Whistler Mountain. And this is a very famous ski resort that we have here close by in BC, close to where I live. And I love skiing and I love being in the mountains and being in nature because that was a big part of how I grew up. And so whenever I am in nature, you probably know this feeling as well. It's just so awe-inspiring, right? Like the magnificence of the mountains just blows you away, and there's a feeling there that you can't really pinpoint what it is, but it sort of stops you in your tracks, right? It makes everything quiet down in the mind. And I'm fascinated by how by first like trying to identify what that is and why it's so universal, because it seems to me like at least most of the people that I've met experience sort of, you can't really tell what people are feeling, but it's a very similar feeling for most of people. And similar to how music that doesn't have any specific, doesn't have to have a language or anything specific, makes a lot of people feel a certain thing, like happy music, sad music. I'm interested in how landscapes can also have that impact, how some landscape can make you feel very calm, something can make you feel more on edge. And so that's the essential search behind my work in landscape, is to capture that impact, that awe that it has, and try to paint from those emotions that I felt when I was standing there, right? And at this point, I feel super blessed and fortunate to be able to now paint full time. I always loved landscapes. I painted throughout my life all sorts of stuff. As I mentioned before, like growing up, I had a part where it was all race cars, and I only painted race cars. And then it was all medieval armor things and creatures. And then all the Lord of the Rings came out, and I was like so into that. Yeah, so you probably know the landscapes. And I was just painting out of reading the books, and I saw the movies in the theaters and stuff. But always in my mind, I thought if I ever want to go more serious into paintings, it has to be something that I really would like to have in my house and be able to look full time. And for me, that has always been landscapes. And so a few years ago, after moving to Canada, I just was so blown away by the nature here that I started painting. I said, okay, I want to have a painting in my home from these mountains. And so I went to the store and bought the biggest canvas they had, and started painting it and putting it up in social media. And people really started taking an interest in it. There because of the style and the size and the compositions that I was doing. It was sort of a more contemporary and different approach to landscape paintings. And it's been really growing from there. And yeah, I'm just doing it full time, and I absolutely love it.
That's awesome. So social media has actually been a big part of your journey and your trajectory and getting your name out there. When, if you don't mind me asking, when was that first post made? And was it posted on Instagram or Facebook?
Yeah, it was on Instagram. And I think it was when was it? 2017 or 2018, like late 2017 or early 2018.
Wow. So this thing has just been meteoric.
Fairly recent.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. It just, but it was, it's not something that I just a year ago decided, oh, I'm going to have a go at painting landscapes and see what happens. And boom, it's been a lifetime of cumulative things. Right.
Absolutely.
And so, it just so happened that landscapes was the thing that for one part, it's what motivated me the most, but also people have responded to it, right? I've painted many things before, and a lot of them have just, gotten a few likes in my Facebook and are in some basement somewhere. And but this, I feel it's it's the thing similar to what happens with music. It's landscape is so universal, right? Like where everybody has a relationship to landscapes.
That's right.
And what I liked about my work too, and that's something that I like, the kind of art that I appreciate is also a kind of art that doesn't need a big text right next to it, or an art expert telling you, oh,
Oh my
this
goodness.
is Lucas and his childhood trauma, and so he paints this spot here that indicates his dad and whatever. So like to me, all of that stuff which has just gained a lot of traction last century, I guess. Um, I don't understand how it got put in the same category as what I consider art, right? Like big, like Rembrandts and Monets and Bierstadts and like all like the craft, right? The thing that can stand on its own. How that has gotten in the same bag as pure just mental explorations, right? And
Yeah.
so I would call it something else. And so for me, that's always the stuff that I admire, like something that can stand in a room and I can just walk in and say like, wow, I couldn't do that. How has it been done? Why do I like it? And just being able to be able to look at it for a while and actually also have a feeling of liking it, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that's amazing, but then it's like, oh, it actually like touches on my darkest corners and puts me too much on edge. And sure, it's nice to watch it for a while and have some introspection, but it's not what I would like to have hanging in my house all the time. Something that's going to uplift me and bring me to a good space. And so if I'm going to be spending months painting something, at least at this time of my life, it's going to be more about the stuff that I actually love and feels like the highest qualities in myself reflected on.
That's wonderful to hear, because really essentially what you're doing then is you're exploring something for yourself. You're painting for yourself and not necessarily trying to cater to an audience, it sounds like. You're just trying to scratch that itch and find that thing that inspires you most. I mean, because as you said, when you started this journey, you wanted to paint something that was for your own house. Now,
Yeah.
I think that's so cool, because I think the trap that a lot of us artists build for ourselves is this idea of catering to an audience. And also, I've spoken about this in the podcast so much, and myself and my guests have kind of reflected on this theme of authenticity versus originality. I for one, kind of have to put the originality out the window. I don't even consider it. All I go is, what's cool? What do I love? What do I really want to see? And what would I hang on my living room wall? What is the thing that I could see myself living with? And this is the thing I love. For me, just my personal feeling when I see another artist that I feel is like really dialed in. It's somebody who is like authentically just going, no, what's cool? What do I want to live with? And I really admire that. Now, this painting, we should mention as well that the painting behind you is an absolute freaking monster. Oh man, come on, okay. It's well and truly bigger than you. So, what did you say this was? It was 96 by 60
96
inches?
by 60, yeah.
Inches.
So that's like 240 by 150 or something like that.
Wow.
Roughly, yeah.
See, and again, I mean, I know what an undertaking it is to paint something that big. How long did that painting take you to do?
So this one, it actually started last winter. That was when I actually was there skiing one day, and I had this just amazing day. And then the thought just stuck with me for a long time. And then I ordered the canvas, but then I moved. We actually moved from Vancouver to here, and so I had the canvas laying there for a few months. And then I started it. I think I 2-3 months of painting. But normally, like what I estimate, they take around 200 to 300 hours. And the way I paint wet in wet, a la prima, and I don't do layering or anything like that. So I go and I try to do it as good as I can. And once the canvas is full of paint, that's it. I may come back to some details here and there, but I try to do it all in one go. And so what I like to do is to get a period of time where I'm going to be working on one piece and just consistently be able to work on that, because as you know, like stuff needs to be wet to blend in, and so it's I do like short marathons, right? And then there's periods in between where a few weeks go by and I'm not painting anything. I'm just thinking or preparing, and a lot of time goes into just preparing stuff before I even start painting, right? Selecting all the colors and making sure the composition is right, and thinking, like trying to I do like reps in my mind of how I'm gonna approach it, like where I'm gonna start and what is gonna come next and what's gonna be a good area that I'll finish in a week or so. Yeah, just figure out the game plan before going into it. But for me, the size is actually I want to, like, I work with this and bigger canvases, and the reason for that is something that I noticed. You know, when you're out in nature and it's just it's vast, it's fully surrounding you, and it hits you. And then we always go and like we take a little picture with our phone and you look at it in 3 inches and it's always disappointing. Like it doesn't convey the same impact, right? And so I found that with the scale of these paintings, it's sort of when you're standing in front of it draws you in again, and it connects you to a more, like, it does something in your brain that it actually feels more like being in nature. And it's just much more emotional as a viewer to be standing in something huge and seeing the full landscape than just looking at something that's very small.
It's interesting. I've always had that feeling when I get back from a trip, or like, you know, I've gone someplace like extraordinary, and
Oh
then I
yeah,
get back to the studio, I'm looking at the photographs, and there's this massive letdown feeling. And then
yeah,
the act of painting, you know, using some of those references is like teasing that feeling back out again. Of going, yeah,
100%.
I remember this was epic. I remember the scale was just off the charts,
Yeah,
and when I was there, I was just blown away. But
yeah.
now, you know, it's reduced down to pixels and just this little tiny thing. Now, I totally
Yeah,
get that. And to me, it's just the act of painting itself is almost the act of remembering, you know,
yeah.
what it was like to be out there. It's really cool because as you're speaking, I'm getting these kind of visions of your grandfather, who would be kind of looking at you now, and the way he studied the landscape, and as you were saying, you know, the waves and tides, and
Hmm.
you know, even making portraits. There's something of that artist nature definitely coming through. You know, yeah.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's a good way to put it. It's definitely about remembering and reconnecting with that emotion. And to me, something that I noticed as well, and not necessarily now, but throughout my life, is that when, like, the moment of biggest inspiration is, and the moment you like the painting the most is when you get that first idea. Oh, this is going to be a painting, and you can sort of visualize it, and like so many emotions come up. Um, and then when you're in your studio and you start painting, that it tends to diminish a lot. It's kind of like I don't know, you get under a spell, right? And until the painting is actually done, like I think like once you start a painting, you actually can never really see the painting as it actually is. As an artist, you always just see the brushstrokes and the paint, and you know where is what, and oh, this could have been done differently, or here I would adjust this. It You're never going to see it the same way someone sees it for the first time, not even if it was yourself. And so I feel like it's very important to have like an emotional registry of what you felt at that first time, and to sort of try to, it's like a muscle, right? Whenever you're painting, like evoke that feeling, and that's going to fire you up again to keep going. And for me, that's what happens with these mountains. Like some of the emotions that I feel is like, oh, epic, big, cool, crisp, cold, things like that. And when I'm painting, like I try to reconnect with it, and oh yeah, and then you can sort of keep playing in the shadows, and it's just a mountain. Like there's millions of them, but there's something that you felt at one point that made it so unique. And when you're painting that, I feel like definitely those emotions get um, like imprinted onto what you're doing, and that, yeah, eventually people then see it and can feel it as well.
There's this thing that I feel again, just reflecting what you're saying there, like standing out in the landscape, and you're standing at this magnificent view. I can see the composition right then and there. I'm like, man, this needs to be put on canvas, and so
Yeah.
of course, I'll record that with a camera, maybe video or something like that. But what I've been in the habit of doing in recent years is when I get back to the studio, I'll make a short list of all of the compositions that I saw on my trip away, or my daily
Nice.
excursion to go and paint on plein air. So I'll do a little thumbnail sketch, but then I'll put a statement next to that sketch about something that I loved. And to me, that word love, that's an important word, because I think as artists, I think we need to be dialed into the emotion side of things as well, because there's something there that gets us on a heart level. It's like, no, what is
Yep.
not just what do I like about, no, what do I love about this? What is
Absolutely.
really cool about this? What is the thing that is drawing me in? And then how can I tease that out and then present that to the viewer? That's been such an important part for me and my artistic journey. It's not that you hit it on every single painting and you're able to recapture that, but the thing that I'm addicted to is just trying,
Yeah, totally.
just giving it a shot, and it's the process that, it's not that you're creating, for me necessarily, it's not that I'm creating standalone works that everyone's a hit, but each one I just feel I get a little bit closer, and yeah, it's fun. So what do you?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this though, because you will get this, I'm sure of it. What do you do, or how do you feel when you have people look at your work and say, "Lucas, great work, mate. It looks just like a photograph."
Well, at the beginning, I was like, oh, well, actually, I hope it looks like a landscape, right? And then, yeah, that's what I meant. So I sort of understood that people, when they say that it looks like a photograph, it means that it actually looks accurate, right? Because what's what we know nowadays is it's very, and that's something I've been reflecting to a lot, and that's also something that I watch when I started, like when I sort of working on my style. I feel the way that people consume landscapes nowadays, and most of stuff in life, it's through photographs, right? People look at landscapes very differently than they would look back 50, 20, 100 years ago. Like I was in the Rockies a few weeks ago, and I was reading about how when they were building the railroads, they would they would build these like the railroad itself would lease out land around it for developers to build hotels, luxury hotels, to bring people from Europe to come and see the Rockies, right? And they would come for months. Like they would bring their butlers, they would bring huge chests of clothes, and they would stay for months just looking at the Rockies, right? And they would go on tours and go to Lake Louise and go have their tea there. And it's just such a different perception of time and how to interact with things, right? But that's a thing of the past. So I guess back then you would do a painting and they would say, oh, that looks exactly like what I saw in the Rockies. And nowadays, oh, that's exactly like what I saw on Instagram or whatever. I think it comes from there. But I think it means the same, that it just means that, wow, you nailed it. Like that's exactly what it looks like and what I feel when I look at it. And so yeah, I take it as a compliment, I guess. and for me too, like sometimes I see paintings of others and I feel like, wow, like is that a photograph? Like, and then you walk up close and, oh no, it's still a painting. Good.
Okay, well then I got another stupid question for you. What do you then say? And I'm asking this because I still don't have a good answer for it. Because I have gotten this from time to time. I still get it. Lucas, why not just take a photograph? What's the point?
What's the point? Well, what's the point of anything, right? And the thing too is I can't really like now take the camera and put you back, but
Sure.
I'm sure with your paintings as well, like something may look like a photograph from a certain distance, but as you bring it close, it's still you see the brushstrokes, and that's something that for me is important as well, to keep a painterly aspect to it.
Yes.
And that's why I also don't call it like photorealism. It's I'm not really painting every little tree and every little rock. It's more of like experiential realism, because it's like realistic, it's accurate depiction of something, but it's more of a depiction of an experience and an emotion I had. It's not that much like really every little tree and how it looks and how the camera captures it. And there's a lot of things that the camera can do, like like the different exposures between light and shadow, and some colors also get a little bit messed up, and it's never gonna see the same way your brain sees. Like your brain is perfectly capable of seeing detail in the dark shadow and seeing a super sunlit surface at the same time, right? And if you would take a photograph like that could do that, it would look super flat because your brain is sort of triggering, right? And I feel that's the magic of painting. You can actually fine tune into doing that and creating the illusion that you're actually looking at a landscape and not a photograph. Probably if I would print this out, this would all be like black. You wouldn't see anything in the shadows, and let alone the forest would be completely black. Or you would see the forest nice, and this would be all white, blown out, and you wouldn't see anything.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, and then also I feel like there's at least I also love the challenge of people say, oh, well, you're just like painting a photograph or whatever, and it's like, you know how hard it actually is. Like, try to paint a photograph. Like people who do photorealism, which is not what I am fully after, but I do appreciate, like, it takes so much work. Like, there's this guy, I don't know his name now, but he paints like fishes in a little glass cup. And...
Oh, I know of that guy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen his work before. Yeah, and he paints them in such a way that it looks like you could touch them, but it's small subjects, but blowing up quite big as well.
Yeah, exactly. And he has like 100 little brushes, and I don't know how long it takes him, but it's amazing, and that really looks like a printed out photograph, even for like super up close.
Yeah.
Whereas I still like to keep a painterly aspect to it, and and it definitely conveys something different than a photo.
Yeah, I mean, and as I said, I did preface that by saying it was a stupid question. Because I do get that. I have got that before a few times, and
how do you deal with it?
I tell them where to go. I don't like swearing on the podcast, but you could probably imagine what I tell them. No, I try to be nice to people, because sometimes, with the first thing is like, oh, wow, it looks just like a photo. To me, as we're saying, it's very much the language of today. And I love what you were saying about, people going to have their tea at Lake Louise and appreciating the Rocky Mountains, where it's like, oh, that looks just like the landscape, or that triggers the experience that I had in the landscape. Your painting does that. And I guess paintings had maybe that type of relevance back in the day, but now, because we're inundated with flat images that we look at on screens, that has now become part of our language. And so everyday people without the art background, maybe that aren't painters at all, will go, wow, that looks just like a photo. But, and so I guess for myself, I have to take it as a compliment, because all they're trying to do is say, hey, to me, you're hitting the right notes where that looks real enough that it reflects the experience that I've had, even if it's through my iPhone.
Yeah, exactly.
So to me, that's fine. But with the other one, with, hey, why not just take a photograph? This is often said by people who don't paint. And I think you can always go so much further in a painting, as you were saying, than you can with a flat photograph, because with an extreme scenario like what we have behind you, and I call that extreme in terms of the lighting, as you're saying, you got all sorts of beautiful nuance that happens in sunlit snow. And of course, if you try to take a photograph of that and you're perfectly exposed in your photograph, even on your iPhone with a high dynamic range or whatever, it's going to still capture that snow reasonably well. But now all your shadows have completely dropped out. So if you're going to do that, maybe you could employ bracketing, and maybe you could process the image digitally. But I think in the hands of a really good oil painter, you're able to hit that reality button a little bit better than any photograph ever could. So you're really going above and beyond and pushing the image beyond. And I love that. I love that about your work. You said something there, though, that I think that's the first time I've ever heard that said. And I maybe we can take this opportunity, if this is original, you can go ahead and coin that. Experiential realism.
There
I've
you
never
go.
heard
Okay.
that before. And I think as soon as you said it, I'm like, that's a
Hmm.
perfect term that
Hmm.
describes what we do as painters. Is celebrating that experience and creating realism based on our experience. It's not hyperrealism. It's not
No.
photorealism. It's
Yep.
experiential realism. That's so cool, man.
Absolutely.
So go
Okay.
ahead, you coin it. If it's not a thing, you heard it here
Yeah.
first,
Well,
folks.
I don't know. From it's something that yeah. It's something that I was reflecting too because people were asking me, okay, so what's your style? And first I was thinking, well, it's definitely not photorealism because like I know it's not, and it's not what I'm after. And but it's also not realism because realism, what I associate is like I don't know, like John Singer Sargent is realism, right? And but it doesn't look like what I would feel in a landscape nowadays, at least. And I think that comes a little bit back to how we consume landscapes nowadays. I definitely feel that like if you compare like a very contemporary portrait and a very like late 1800s portrait, both like at the top of their game, beautiful. Um, they look very different, like, and you can tell like, oh, this looks more vintage, like it looks more of the days of old, and this looks like more the days of today. And even sure today they're using more camera and stuff, but even if they're still like painting life, um, I feel that difference has a lot to do with the way that at certain time people consume whatever subject matter it is, right? The way people would look back then, like maybe the rooms were painted differently, they had different lighting, um, everything in that era is just perceived different, and their experience different. So that's why it looks different. And nowadays, everything like we consume so much stuff through social media and a lot of presets and saturation and things that definitely affects the way we perceive things. And so I think realism nowadays, if you're painting it to look vintage, then you maybe could call it would still be called realism. But I think nowadays realism is not the same realism as what's commonly felt as. So I don't know. That's that's where I was trying to bring more of the experience part of it into it for sure. I guess everything could be called experiential realism because they were experiencing something at the time out there as well. But I don't know. Let's use a new word for it. Sounds good.
No, I think it
Yeah.
needs a new word. I like it. I'm sticking to it. But
Sounds
I,
good.
I will give you credit anytime I use it.
Okay. Okay.
Look, this is
It's royalty free, guys. So, yeah.
oh wow, could you imagine?
Yeah.
So
Uh,
that's actually a good one though. Royalties, I like that. Because as artists, especially as experiential realists, we need to find ways of monetizing our work. What a segue. Wasn't that a great segue?
good one. Yeah.
No, but I think we got to find a way to kind of market ourselves, get our work out there, share our work, and sell our work ultimately. What I really like to ask you about, because you know this is relatively recent for you, like
Yeah.
if you don't mind me saying, I mean, from the first post to just exploding onto the scene as full-time artist, you've got this impressive body of work. How are you shifting these paintings? How are you marketing and selling your work now? Do you work with galleries, for instance? Can you give me a snapshot of how your business works?
Yeah. I do work with a gallery, and it's been quite okay. I just send them paintings and they sell them for me. And then I do a lot of like private and private commissions for my own personal network of just private clients, and that has been growing a lot. And yeah, like I said before, like I painted most of my life, but these landscapes and what is now like my thing, my it, and what I'm sticking to. Um, a lot of it has come from social media. So people find me on Instagram, they go to my website, they see it, they like it, they show it to some friends, or they comment and they ask, oh, like, would it be possible to paint this for me? And then also a lot of work I've been getting more and more is from people who have a painting in their home, and friends come over and see it, love it, and then they want to order paintings as well. So um, those have been my main channels. And and it's been for me a thing of like demand and supply, right? My paintings do take a long time to produce, and people, I think that's something that stuff that's like realistic or that has some level of craftsmanship behind it can sort of shortcut that grind of having to start at a very low price point and having to slowly build up. If there's something that has an inherent quality to it that is kind of undeniable, people will see that and will understand, like, oh yeah, I get why this is a premium thing and why it has a certain cost to it. And they're not necessarily like outraged by, oh, why are you thinking you can charge this much? And it's like, oh yeah, wow, that looks impressive. I can't afford it, or yeah, I know what it's worth, and here's a check.
That's wonderful. So, a couple of things I want to ask you then about that. How does one build their own network of personal clients? How did you build that list, and how do you continually and actively market to those people?
Yeah, so it's still growing, of course, and a lot of it started with just like people who found me and ordered their first painting, and it was people I didn't know, and then through them I got introduced to friends and family, and it just grew like that. And then also just people that I did know from work. When we moved to Canada first, my wife and I got full-time jobs, and I was working as an industrial designer because I actually studied design. That's another part that I can touch upon. And my wife as an architect, and being in that field, we got to know a lot of people in Vancouver as well who were like big into high-end homes or big into skiing. Like there's a huge sports and outdoors community here in Western Canada. And all of them, when they saw that I was actually doing these paintings and we would show them to them, they all got excited. And some of those people were my first customers as well. And then they kept referring me on. So, and I just grew that up. And it's a lot of it, I feel, it's about that personal connection and showing up and calling people and having meetings and doing stuff together. I feel it's as nice as it is to get like an anonymous sale through a gallery. There's something definitely to be said about having a relationship to the person who's going to have your painting, and that person is not only going to buy a painting because they just like the thing. It's because they like you as a person, and they have a good connection, a good vibe, and they want to support you and just cheer you along, right? And so that's how that's been growing.
That's amazing. And you know, that's one of the reasons why I've been quite critical of galleries and feel like the model is inherently flawed, is because it doesn't allow the artists themselves to build that personal connection. That middle ground between, you know, gallery and client is really fiercely guarded by the gallery. You know, you're not going to meet your client that comes into the gallery. If that gallery, you know, that's just something that they're protecting. And I get it. I get the business side of things, because some artists would then go about, you know, trying to network and undercut the gallery and try and go direct. And I appreciate that. But for me, going it alone, being independent and forging those personal relationships with my clients, that's been, you couldn't put a price on it. You could not put a price on it, because the other thing as well, just as somebody that's I'm obsessed with providing a service and being of service and of help and being valuable, that I want to hear what their needs are. And so if there's a communication filter between me and my client, I can't really tell. I can't hear it in their voice. I can't, you know, we never met. So all I have is Andrew, you got a request here. We need to do this painting or whatever. And, oh, by the way, give me 50%. No, I'm not doing it. You know, so you sound like you're very much on the cusp or on the verge of going it alone, or maybe trying that for a while. Or am I assuming too much, Lucas?
No, that's correct, and I think that's something that ultimately every artist. I'm not going to say every artist, because there's different roads and there's different scenarios for everyone. But for a lot of people, it does make sense, and it all comes down to how do you want to live your life and how do you want to live your business. Because for me, this is not just like if I would have, I don't know, like a clothing company, and sure, some product gets built, and I don't care if I'm selling it or if I have some retailers here. It's a product that's detached from me. Like I care about my business and I figure out how to make money and how to move things around. But here, my business is sort of ingrained with my entire life. Like I spend time going to these places, I spend time thinking about them, I spend hours and hours working on them. And I do, or at least me, I'm a people's person as well. As much time as I spend isolated in my studio, I do like having personal time with people. And so I find it so much more rewarding when that process is actually shared. And I do have a connection and I know where it's going, and I can always like call them up, or they can send me pictures. Oh, loving it today. Like we had some friends over and this happened. Like they were making comments. Like that's so awesome. And then comparing the experiences that I had when selling through a gallery and selling like to people that came to me and just wanted something, that fully resonates with me, and that's how I want to build my thing. And also I feel like I mean, you get another gallery sale, cool, then you have to just produce another painting, take in there, it sells, cool, and then it's the next one, that's the next one. And maybe over time, like your prices increase by something that have no control on. And how do you ever break free of that? Like it's never going to be your own show. And at least for me, like this is all so personal that I want to have the whole experience. Not because I'm a control freak or anything, but I really want to be in all the parts of the process, right? And I feel the only way to grow it is to actually like go out there and just put the work in and the effort. It's basically effort and energy and focus into growing your art business as you want to live it, right? Because it's going to take years, and it's a years long commitment. It's not something that you do short term to make some money and then you move on to the next thing. That's also the thing. You can't. I wouldn't go into painting a huge canvas. It's going to take me months if it wasn't something that I'm completely committed on for decades to come. At least that's what I think now. But and so as such, I'm thinking, oh, decades. Okay, how I'm going to live those decades? I want to have this kind of structure, and that structure for me is a very personal and direct thing.
So you're very much thinking about this with the long term in mind. And so
Yeah.
you've got some sort of vision for how you'd like your artistic journey to kind of pan out. So do you again, I ask pretty much all the artists that are on the podcast this question. Do you is goal setting is something that's important for you? And if so, do you write them down? What kind of structure do you take when making goals?
So what I found throughout the years, like, is that, well, I just turned 30, right? So I think like I finished high school at 18, then I had university. So I feel like the time that I had actually where I was out in the world and making my own decisions, it's been just a few years, right? And before that, everything is pretty much laid out for you, and you just have to play along, and you think you're making decisions, but nothing's happening. Now every decision that I make has a much bigger impact, right? And so goal setting now it's more important. But also what I have seen is that I would say 90% of the things that I'm doing now and that I enjoy the most, I could have never planned and I haven't foreseen, right? and so I do like mainly mentally think about like scenarios where I would like to see myself, and sort of like get that feeling of what it would be like to have that life, and what a certain lifestyle would look like in 5 years, 10 years. But I'm always very much open to, okay, like that's what I would like, but I'm perfectly fine with whatever comes, and I'm just going to give my 100% effort into it. And I do practice a lot of like meditation and yoga and breathing methods and things like that. And within all those, within that realm, one of the first things that you learn is that like everything is changing. all the time, right? And sure, you can plan as much as you like, but if you're so stuck to your plans, you're also opening the can of worms for the biggest misery ever, right? And so I'm not too interested in having this plan and like just struggling and struggling to try to get that done, and I may be missing out on some amazing opportunities, right? So I find it as a balance, and for me personally, I actually like I have horrible handwriting, and I've never been. I don't have the patience to sit down and write, and so it. But I do have a fairly good memory, especially like emotional memory, and so for me, like my checklists and things like that happen just in my head and in my heart, I guess, and I can easily reconnect with them, and then I can sort of align. Oh, is this does this feel like it's gonna lead me toward that vision or towards something else? And then I have to be honest with myself at that time, and I think that's one of the hardest thing, like not lie to oneself. And so, for instance, that's a thing like with the galleries, for example, we were talking about earlier. Um, if there's something about the gallery system and the people you're working with that doesn't feel like it's going to ultimately lead you to where you want to be, like you have to think, oh, can I take 10 years of this? Like am I going to be okay in 10 years looking back at me now and saying it's good that you stay in that relationship or whatever, or you put up with that, or would you be proud of yourself if you were doing something else? And so I think that takes courage and say, look, no, actually, I want to be the guy that in a few years I would be proud of myself for having done certain decisions, and then just going for them. Yeah, forgot what the question was, but
You answered it beautifully. No,
Okay.
no. You answered it beautifully. In fact, there's a couple of things there, a couple of little rabbit holes opened up that I wouldn't mind going down. But
Sure.
again, I appreciate what you're saying because life is uncertain. And, people may remember from my podcast that I recorded with Caleb Brown, um, he was talking about, the reality of life being one of, suffering and suffering
Mm-hmm.
and misery and that sort of thing. I mean, that's going to happen. There are going to be challenges. There are going to be setbacks, and we're especially going to experience them as artists. That's just a given. It's not that the whole experience is suffering, because that would be
No.
horrible. Who would want to live that
Yeah.
life? But it's that challenges will come up as part of the journey, and nowhere on that list of goals do I have written, for instance, any challenges or any place where I'm going to
Exactly. Yeah.
suffer. I'm not anticipating that within my plan. The one thing though, and I do appreciate what you're saying, but the one thing though that I will say, whenever I make a plan and write down my goals, I I am then prepared for flexibility. And I kind of
Mm-hmm.
put it up there as a wish list, or as almost a letter to Santa Claus saying,
Yeah.
"Dear Santa, this year I would like," and
Yeah.
I'll let Santa Claus decide, what he's gonna deliver or not.
Yeah.
But I just kind of put one foot in front of the other, faithfully in a particular direction. But the other thing though, that I can hear, from a lot of people is whenever you write a plan down, whenever you commit that and put that on paper, you're kind of leaching the spontaneity out of, just living this life and seeing what
Yeah.
comes up. I found the opposite has actually happened. By doing that, it's actually opened up opportunities and it's gone in really interesting directions.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hope people don't mind me just inserting this into our conversation here, but there was a thing that I did a couple of years ago, and I must do it again in conjunction with writing down my goals and the plan. But I had one of these things called a vision board, and
Okay.
get your vomit bucket ready. I would put on a little cork board, and it was actually massive because I don't do things by halves, but it was massive. It was like 2 meters by a meter, and I just stuck all this stuff up on there about things I'd love to have, places I'd
Yeah.
like to go, and it was just pictures that would trigger that memory for myself. And
Sure.
I remember at the end of a couple of years, we had moved. I'd gotten the vision board back out again. I spent, a while
Mm-hmm.
actively looking at this thing, but after the move and then kind of unpacking and coming into the new place, I was looking at this vision board going, my God,
it's been achieved.
Everything has been achieved, and
Yeah,
with maybe the exception of a couple of things, but the places I wanted to go, the people I wanted to talk to, the people I wanted to meet, things I
nice.
wanted to do with my career. And I think for me,
Hmm.
what it was is just about, because you've got this already. It's internally built. I can hear that, where it's like this compass that's guiding you, and it's your emotional memory, as you were saying. You're very heart driven, and for me, I guess I'm similar in that way. But it's nice having something to kind of look at and refer to and go, oh
Yeah.
yeah, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm committed to. Yeah, I love that. But you mentioned something about meditation. And so I
Hmm.
can hear, and you seem like a really, dialed in guy, you're really mindful about what you're doing. And if not, the illusion is working. I'll let you know that. But how does,
Okay, cut.
how does, how does meditation, affect your art, and how does that guide you artistically?
I don't know. I can say that it's how can I put this? It's 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 not necessarily like it changes your art. Like when I started, let's go like this way. Like I always was interested in meditation and yoga and all of these things because I heard stories of my other grandfather from my mother's side who in the 40s and 30s, living in Uruguay, which is the little country next to Argentina. He got a hold of this book called Autobiography of a Yogi, which is like the first guy from India who brought yoga and meditation to the States. And he just that apparently blew his mind, and he became very very interested in it. And he got the Indian consulate to bring a Swami to Uruguay and start teaching about all these ancient texts from India about and doing yoga and meditation. And he sort of embedded that into the family a bit. And but then he passed away at a very young age, and so my family didn't continue with that. But always when I would hear those stories and what you hear about meditation growing up, you think it's like, oh, like it's going to give you superpowers, or like your brain is going to start working differently. And so I was always curious, and I always liked more of that aspect, like supernatural stuff. Um, but I never really had the time. But then when I reencountered with Janine, who's now my wife, um, that's another story of its own. But anyways, she has been practicing yoga and meditation for over a decade. And when we were starting to live together, she would do her practices every morning. And there was just something about the way she lived her life that I could see. Um, wow, there's a certain like mental priming or something, whatever you want to call it, that's just different. Like the wiring seems different on her than what I feel. And so I asked her, like, hey, can I just join you? And she said, no, I'll just gift you a course, and you can like learn your practice properly and then start incorporating it into your life. And honestly, at that time, like I didn't have any kind of traumas or anything. I was always a pretty happy, like positive guy and always doing stuff, so I was quite okay. But the first time I started experiencing these, especially like some rhythmic breathing techniques and things that I practice now, um, uh, like it really blew my mind, like the kind of experiences that your body can have without consuming any type of substance. And then the overall effect on my general mindset throughout the day while doing this consistently, right? It's similar to, I guess, the difference of showering or not showering. Like go without showering for 2 months and see how you feel, or shower regularly and see how you feel. And honestly, it felt to me like that. Like all of a sudden, it was very gradual and subtle, but oh wow, I'm actually like more positive throughout the day, or I'm not clinging on so much to whatever negative things happens. And I get more and more connected to my sounds very cheesy, but like my intuitive part, like sort of we always have an internal compass of knowing, oh, this feels right, this feels bad. And in a good sense, like a piece of chocolate can feel good, but you know that after it you're gonna feel bad, right? And then or at least too much of it. And so, but there's things that overall are going to be the healthier, the better choice. And like one it's funny because like good can't exist without its complement, right? You can't appreciate the good stuff without the negative stuff. But overall, there's a part of you that always knows what's best. And through practicing meditation and these things regularly, I've felt like that that voice, that impulse, that whatever you want to call it, has just gotten stronger and stronger to the point that as I keep doing it, it's just like it's like a muscle. It's just stronger, and I can rely on it more, and it's been proven to be more effective. And what I do feel the impact it has had on my artwork is that general state of mind of being more positive and more just in a better mood overall has translated to work that is on a good mood, on positive notes. And there was a stage of my life where I was going through a university and I was super stressed. I was living alone in Europe because I grew up in Argentina, but then I moved to Austria to study. And it was a dark winter and I was eating very poorly and I didn't know about vitamin D deprivation and whatever. And I was like borderline, I wouldn't say depressed, but like very, very stressed out. And I was painting some stuff and I was fascinated by like Renaissance style at the time. So everything was sepia and like that. And it was just scenes of people chopping each other's heads off and massive war fields, like completely what you wouldn't expect now. And very much about criticizing stuff about society and very like figurative, like I did like a painting that was like a battlefield and it was like just two armies going against each other and fighting over a huge pile of just like skeletons and chopped up body parts, and behind them there were like just some politicians screaming at each other and everyone was just fighting and the earth around was crumbling and there was an explosion in the sky, and very much about like how people numbly just join the bandwagon and hack at each other and it's just for nothing, right? Everyone's the same. And anyways, like that was like a big part of my life. I was in that weird darkish space, but you're so engrossed in it that you can't really realize, right? And then all of a sudden I moved on, stuff changed, and I incorporated meditation in my life, and all of a sudden, wow, I'm feeling more positive, more good. It's like, oh, how nice to actually be able to paint something that it's beautiful, right? It has nice emotions to it. So I think that has the effects of these things have reflected not only my artwork but in my whole life, and it's been wonderful. I highly recommend it.
You were dark. Gee.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's a far cry from the beautiful work that we see now. I mean, look, it's not that sort of subject matter can't be painted beautifully. But,
no, I know.
Holy moly. Yeah, vitamin D is a big one. We go through particularly long, cold, dark winters here at the bottom of the South Island of New Zealand. Probably similar to what you get in Europe, I'm sure.
Western Canada.
But yeah, it's vitamin D is really essential. It's got all kinds of benefits for, I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't say. I just know I take it. But I gotta take it pretty regularly. Yeah. But it's interesting, because I can actually hear absolutely the meditation has affected your art. Maybe it fundamentally changed what you were driven to, as a painter and as an individual.
To be able to observe your mind and how it goes, like that's such a cliche. Like the mind has this tendency of like vacillating between the past and the future. And that sort of, it's like a saw, right? And that saw moving back and forth, it's what causes a lot of stress in the mind, because whenever you experience an emotion, whenever you have a thought, that's going to trigger an emotion, correct? And that emotion is going to trigger a lot of stuff in your body that you're not necessarily in control of. One, for instance, is the breath. If you are experiencing anger, you're going to like breathe a certain way. If you're depressed, you're going to exhale more. If you're happy, it's more inhalations, right? And so with every thought, there's an emotion that comes up, and with every emotion, there's a whole like biological thing that goes on. And the cool thing is that these techniques, like breathing techniques and meditation, it's like a two-way street. Like through influencing the way you breathe, you can influence your emotions, and eventually that's going to influence your thoughts. And it's right under our nose, right? But it's not mainstream. It's becoming more mainstream, but it's not necessarily something you learn at school. I mean, everybody tells you, oh, just breathe, but there's much more to it. And so to be able to not let your mind just ramble on its own for so long that it becomes sort of chronic. Like you see sometimes people who you meet and it immediately is like, hey, how are you doing? Good, but you know what happened like last day? This motherfucker. Sorry, like it's just a ramble and ramble and ramble, and all they can talk about is like the good old days, their anecdotes, or some people who are like only like, well, I'm gonna be doing this. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, cool, but you know what I'm gonna be doing? Like people who are so caught up, right? And it's like, oh, dude, you're actually not even here. Like your body is here maybe, but your mind is completely somewhere else. And I think like all these media things have definitely a big impact in how that's accelerated nowadays. And I can't say it's good or bad or whatever, because it's just the times that there are, and it's only going to accelerate. But I do feel like what happens is then your system gets so jarred because, like it or not, like your mind can go wherever it wants, but your body is still here. Like you can't escape the present. Like a big part of your existence is still in the present. And so if you stress it so much, it just becomes primed to be uncomfortable in the present, because you can't do anything. You can't do anything about the guy the girl who didn't ask you out even though you were better looking, and you can't still do anything about the bills you have to pay tomorrow or like.
Yeah, but Lucas,
I mean,
I can find that guy that owes me $5.
Okay.
I know where he lives. I can do something about that one.
Okay.
I've got my ways.
But yeah,
I see what you're
the
saying,
thing is,
though. Yeah.
Yeah, thinking about it all the time, that's just gonna bring a misery. And so I think like these practices are so essential to come back to that moment. And yeah, it's awesome. And like you were saying, I think for especially like I would not only call it like creative work. I would say all the stuff that doesn't require a lot of like physical work, where it's more of like your mind is really active all the time. I would say it's crucial to actually have something to clean it up, to bring it back to a more positive state. That way you can see things more objectively as well. Check yourself. It's just like showering for your brain, for your mind. Very, very, very good. Very good. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of showering too.
Yeah.
I think we need it.
Yeah.
You know, so one of the things that
sorry,
go on. Please carry on, Lucas.
And I think too, like that's really important, and also like physical exercise, crucial. And for us,
Absolutely.
people who spend a lot of hours in the studio, like your the same way your mind has certain requirements, and you need to sleep at a certain time, and you need to eat at a certain time. Your body also has requirements, and today, like it's so easy to just sit in a chair and do everything from a chair, especially if you're on your own. Like there's no one telling you, okay, now like you have physical education class or whatever. If you don't have to do physical work, then it's so easy to go into the slumber where you just don't do anything, and it's so crucial to actually do the work, get your body tired out, like let all the systems fire up and work their ways, and then you feel so much more focused and present and at ease while you're doing whatever it is you're doing.
Absolutely.
So those two things, boom, you're golden. What is your like workout routine? What have you?
Oh, gee. So
out?
okay, well, I got back into I don't know if I can call it bodybuilding, because it's a little bit more strength and conditioning training now. I used to be really interested in bodybuilding, and there was a time right about when I first started my YouTube channel where I was a lot bigger, and I was just eating everything in sight and spending 2 or 3 hours at the gym every day. But now it's about an hour a day in the gym, 6 days a week. And I basically just go through a routine where I work out every part of my body twice a week. So I go through like still very similar to a bodybuilding routine, where I'll do like a pushing day, which will be chest and triceps, and then a pulling day, which will be back and biceps, and maybe some core, maybe some calves. And then on the other day, it'll be shoulders and legs. And then I'll just repeat that, but I switch it up. I use a lot of kettlebells. I do a lot of,
Okay.
conditioning type training where I'll do supersets or trisets, which is three exercises back to back for 4 sets. So I'm
Okay.
starting to build a lot more volume into the gym
Yeah.
sets, which is great.
Nice. Hmm.
The only rule is you have to leave that place exhausted and sweaty. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
How about you? So
Yeah.
I know you're into skiing, but do you have a daily gym habit?
Yeah. So it's been very much determined a little bit for where I was living and what I was doing at the time. And I have to say, like, the best thing I found, it's not what I'm doing now, was martial arts. I was doing kung fu in a very like cool school, and that had the perfect balance of agility, strength, stuff that you have to like motions you have to go over, like muscle memory, and then a lot of stretching. And I found like that was also amazing. Before that, I couldn't touch my toes, and at one point I could almost do a full split. Never got there, but almost. And like that was super good. But now what I do is like cardio every day, just go for a run, and that's the great thing where I live now. I can just like go out of my house and go for a run, and I'm in the middle of the forest, and it's amazing. Just that pure oxygen coming in, and yeah, just like a 40-minute run. And while I'm running, I also do like sprints in between. And whenever there's a hill, like I try to sprint it and see every day if I can go further and stuff like that. So like really push your heart, not to a failure, of course, but like as close. And I subscribe to a thing I heard one time. It's like if you're able to do something today, it's very likely you can do it tomorrow. But if you wait for a few days, that might change. And so I feel that's very important. And as we age, like I notice already now, like my stamina, my levels, if I slack for a few days, are completely different from 10 years ago. And of course, it's only gonna keep on changing. So just I think the most important with exercise, well, what you were describing, like doing it consistently a lot of times a week. So cardio, and then I just recently started at a place that does a mix of like CrossFit and powerlifting and all sorts of stuff. So it's more using my muscles. Yeah, so essentially those kind of things. And then whenever I can, of course, like skiing or going here to the ocean, even though it's freezing, like going in for a few seconds, or just getting that shock in, swimming in the summer. Whatever can be done outside is always amazing, but there's always room for just running and lifting stuff, like using our muscles. But then the after a while of doing it, similar to meditation, like the difference you notice when you skip it for a day, it's like so big that after a while it's like a must. Like it doesn't become an option to say, oh, I don't need to be doing this. It's like, no, it's so crucial. Like I'd rather not paint as much, but like the quality of my painting is going to be so much better if I put my workout in and whatever.
Again, something that we've touched on in the podcast many times in past episodes was this idea of building habits that are conducive to creativity, but also go towards building you as a person and as an artist. And I think we need a more holistic approach to the way we live our lives in order to be the best that we can be and produce our best work. There are too many tragic stories out there about people who had life that was a little bit too out of balance, where they didn't, focus enough. And a big one is physical health. I know of people in my own immediate family who have let that go, and consequently have destroyed their lives with it. And it's a tragedy to see that happen. I mean, and of course, they were dealing with a lot of things. It's important to have compassion for these people. They were dealing with a lot, and so they would supplement that with something, be it drugs or alcohol. And when I was watching that, I guess I had the benefit of being the youngest in my immediate family, and also watching my extended family as well, just kind of going, I think I might do it different. And it's not that I have the answer or anything like that. I mean, because I've created my own unique set of challenges. But one of the things that I realized is, the quality of your life is directly determined by the quality of the decisions that you make. And every day is made up of decisions. about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And this has a cumulative effect. And so it might not seem like much. I mean, like what you're saying, you miss a day at the gym, okay, but it might not seem like much. But if that starts building up over a period of time, suddenly it ends up being a very different life, and you end up looking like a very different person. You physically look like a different person. You think like a different person. And so all of these habits that you can introduce into your life that start building that quality of life, what happens, the shift that happened for me and continues to happen because I'm still a work in progress, right? The thing that I'm noticing is this is fundamentally changing my identity of who I feel as a person. It's like, would my identity, would I do this? Would I do X, Y, and Z? You know, like for instance, would I drink alcohol? Now, I'm not judging anybody that drinks, not at all. I mean, a lot of people will go away and have something casually and have a good time, you know. But for me, I'm just like, it's a blanket no. It doesn't touch my lips, not at all, ever. And that ends up, it does, by denying that, I believe it does have a cumulative effect. The exercise as well, the diet as well, the sleep, you know, all of these things. A lot like, you know, Sketch Endeavour. You know, people would have seen the Sketch Endeavour series on YouTube. The non-negotiable time that every day you show up and you do something creative. And that has a cumulative effect. You know, the ongoing joke in the Sketch Endeavour series is kind of like, well, yeah, it's going to take maybe 10,000 hours and 17 and a half years to get to a level of mastery. But I guess the point is it's a cumulative effect of building hours, you know?
Even within 5 years into that, you're going to be already so much more on a different course than if you wouldn't have done it, right? It's like 1 degree of shift in a sailing boat over a period of time. It's such a huge distance, right?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Yeah. How is your Sketch Endeavour going? Like, have you noticed, how do you notice it translating into all the other things you're doing?
It's been challenging keeping it up. I will say that much. There have been a few days that I have missed in recent weeks because of travel. I found that quite difficult to keep the habit up with travel. And I also, while I edit and put together my latest tutorial, that has just taken everything to try and get this tutorial over the line. But the days that I do show up, and again, this conversation is inspiring me, going, you know, I showed up a little bit recently, but no, it needs to get back to the non-negotiable daily time. But it's interesting because I feel at the end of the day, when all of those habits, it's like for me, I like lists, I like goals, I like writing things down, but I like ticking things off. So when I look at that page, I'm like, you know what? I did it. I did something today. So I get an enormous sense of validation and satisfaction from being able to do that. So that's a big first benefit. But what I found directly from doing it as just a habit, you know, and watching the way it's developed my work, my drawings have gotten a lot better. I mean, I was okay to begin with. I mean, I've been a professional artist for, 15 years, going on 16. And so I have my work at a particular quality, but I wasn't expected for such a dramatic jump from where I first started, just sketching a couple of little goats on the page, to drawing landscapes on toned paper with graphite and using white chalk and creating these amazing tonal what I'm excited about, because I'm excited about the results now, but I'm excited about seeing where it's going to go. That's really exciting. As well. So that's awesome. It hasn't been, I will say this, admittedly, it hasn't been a perfect attendance record, but it's I guess we need to just keep it in perspective and go, okay, you know what, we try, that's the main thing, but you just do your best to show up, you know.
And that's also the thing, like I think we're so ingrained with an idea of perfection and like striving for perfection, and we think that perfection actually exists, and there's no really such thing, right? And what we think here, it's so relative, like in a, like we need to keep that broader perspective of our lives, right? And so if you miss a day, that's okay. Like if you come back, it's all fine, right? And like if that often happens too, like a lot of this thing of meditation as well is like just pulling back from your own little perspective and what you think it's happening, and just pull yourself back and like think, oh, there's all these people and everyone's rumbling along, and there's been millions of people before and there's millions of people after, and it's actually just this world, and you zoom out more and it's just that little ball hanging in the middle of space, and what does things really matter, right? But then we are like waves on an ocean, right? We are, at the time the wave is coming up, it is individual and unique. There's not going to be any wave like it, but then it just goes back into the ocean, and that's sort of how our lives as well go, and that can be representative of our entire life and to our habits, to our daily moments. Like it's awesome. I love those kind of things, and so yeah, that's something that it's good to keep in mind. Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been fascinating covering all of these, really cool, crazy, and out there topics. What fun! Because there's more.
I think we talked about anything except the paintings itself, which is awesome. But that's a big part of the creative endeavor, right? It's much more than just the product. It's about the whole. Much more holistic thing. Right?
Absolutely. Well, it's becoming that. I mean, it started off as just, I just wanted to find out more about the business side of things and find out how other professional artists, made it work. And I mean, here we're a little over 20 episodes in, and it's starting to evolve and become something else. I have no idea where this is going. As a whole, as a whole body of podcast episodes, but it sure is fun, just kind of going along for the ride. One thing I will say though is it is just fascinating connecting with so many artists from around the world, and just finding out more about what makes them tick creatively, what really inspires them, what are some of the things that they enjoy thinking about and talking about. And to me, I always find something in every single one of these that I get to take away. Selfishly speaking here, I get so much out of it. And so it's just a really nice thought to hear that other people do, as well. But, we were talking about that, but we haven't actually talked much about the painting side of things. And it might be a perfect
not
place.
That we need to. Yeah.
Well, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole if you don't want to. But there are a couple of things I would actually really like to ask you that are kind of more kind of process questions, and it almost seems not the right time to bring that into the podcast, but why don't we give it a shot anyway? Because here we are, we're looking at this magnificent landscape behind you, and again, I really encourage everybody listening to this and watching this video to go and check out your work on Instagram and on your website, because it is stunning stuff. So walk me through the process. So we know you go out into the field and you have these amazing experiences directly with the subject you want to paint. To me, maybe if we can drive this point home, because as an artist myself, like I believe that is the key, most important thing, is paint or draw or sculpt that which like that thing that maybe it's not what necessarily, but something that you're personally connected to and something that you want to explore. Without preempting what your audience wants to see. This is about the internal journey more than anything. So once you have that experience, walk me through that process of building a painting. What kind of techniques do you use? What is it painted in? Tell me about it.
That's like you said, the first thing is that being actually there and experiencing it and charging up like that internal hard drive, like with as much information as you can. But then in my case as well, is especially for like landscapes, and something that I like to do is explore like alternative points of view. So something that I found to navigate mountains differently is to fly around them. So I do a lot of flights, whether it's with helicopters or planes, and that way it allows you to get sort of at eye level with the mountain peaks, and you can actually see what's behind them as well. And especially when you're doing a huge painting, like if it's a mountain and you're looking at it from valley, it almost feels like it's gonna come and fall over you, right? Whereas if you get higher up and you're facing the mountain sort of at eye level, it almost becomes like a portrait of a mountain. I found that's really interesting, and it's like, again, it's like a different perspective of maybe the mountain has been painted 1,000 times. Like, oh, what does it look like from the air? What does it look like from the side? Like sometimes it's very beautiful as well. So I try to get creative with the ways I actually explore the landscapes. And then when I can, if it's like a mellow place or it's summer, I do some plein air sketches as well. That's always good to check the colors live and stuff, and then bring it back to the studio. And then of course, like taking pictures, and sometimes it takes hundreds of pictures of a place, and then bring them back to my studio. Then of course, like stretching the canvas and figuring out, okay, what's actually going to make it to a big piece, and what's better off for smaller work. Some stuff doesn't really work with different scale, and then it starts with sketching it out, right? And so I at the beginning I was really going for accuracy and going really hard into every little detail and spending so much time. And then as I was painting over, I was saying like, my God, so much time wasted sketching, and now it's all being painted over. And so I found a way to do a more balanced sketching path, where sure it's quite accurate, and I do shading and stuff to guide me when I'm painting, but I don't go too crazy into it, because I know I'll be painting over it as well. And I paint only with oils. I painted acrylics and watercolors and all sorts of stuff, and mixtures of them too, like doing an underpainting in acrylic and then going over it with oils. But I found something in oils, just the way they can reflect color, like the color accuracy, and what you can predict by mixing colors as well is far beyond what you can achieve with acrylics. And I do use a very limited color palette, like starting out, just like 5 or 6 tubes of paint. And before I start, I do like batch mix a lot of color of like what I know it's going to be the main parts of the painting. So it's like like the design process before building a home. It's the planning process before starting a huge painting, because it's if you're mixing on the go for everything, it's going to be impossible to keep the same consistency from one end to the painting to the other. And for me, it's really important that the whole thing looks like one thing, and you don't see, oh, here he started, here he went to bed, here he changed, or he was using something else, here his brush got dirty. Like everything has to look like one. And like that's a challenge, but that's also what makes it fun, right? To figure that out and go into it. And then when it's all done, it's like, oh, wow, that was, yeah, it worked. And I do work, like I was saying before, like wet and wet. So as I go, I just paint. And at the beginning, like in some other paintings that I did, I used to like prime the canvas first, like putting like an undertone, like sepia things. But then I always find that like the light just goes through the paint and bounces out back, and that's gonna tint the color of what you see. And I feel that warmth that it gives was something that wouldn't really work with the type of imagery that I was going for. So I'm just painting on pure white canvas, and it's tricky because it makes it's easy if you have so much light to be fearful of going into the darks, because as soon as you put a little bit of color in, it looks very dark. So it's a matter of practice to actually go with something that's really dark and has to be dark, and then knowing that it's going to work out in the end. And then getting the right nuances of white, right? Because like in each of these like patches of snow here, if you come up close, there's actually like a lot of colors and a lot of different hues and shades, and the way it blends into the shadow. Sometimes it's a harsh shadow, sometimes it's slightly diffuse. There's all these little plays that are just fascinating, and regardless of it's snow or any other scene that's happening, there's so many nuances. And as I keep going, I do feel like my sensitivity gets better, and stuff becomes much more accurate. And like you were saying with your sketches too, it's like every time I finish a paint, people ask me like, oh, what's your favorite painting? It's like the next one. you know,
Right.
because there's everything that I learned here, and like I'm excited to see how I'm going to implement it and how it's going to progress onto the next part as well. So, and then one thing I do want to say is something I've found, and it's like sometimes I used to use what do you call it, like liquid and like different paint thinners and stuff like that. And I was getting massive headaches, even though like I had windows in my studio and stuff. Like I became fairly sensitive to that. So at one point I made the decision to get rid of everything that's non-purely oil or a pigment. And in my studio I only use walnut oil and walnut oil based colors. And it smells beautiful and it's like non-toxic. And it's been a huge change.
Wow.
So
How do you get the walnut oil to dry? How have you found the drying process change in your work? You know, because liquid, as we know, dries pretty quickly. It will go off pretty much overnight. You'll have a dry painting to work on. So how do you find it?
So that has to do with the way I paint. I actually like if it doesn't dry overnight.
Right.
So for me, if it's still wet the other day, that's a good thing. But then they also produce a walnut, what do you call it? Alkite. It's like a kind of resin. So I guess liquid, it's the same idea. And that one speeds up drying process as well. It's not going to be as fast. And it really depends on the color. Like titanium white will still take a few days to fully dry. But if you're using like brown tones, like burnt umber, it'll be dry in a few hours. It's amazing. And so I do play with those too. Like if there's something that is more like jagged, like rocks or things that I want to dry quicker, I would use more of the Alkite walnut oil. But if not, like I just stick to the regular walnut. And if stuff needs time to dry, then so be it. But like for me to have that clean studio when I walk in, it smells nice and I don't get a headache. It's been awesome.
Very good. No, that's good advice. I mean, we do, as painters in particular, we do expose ourselves to all kinds of things. And one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts is, and it really, it gives me a migraine, is as soon as I smell any mineral spirits or turpentine or any petroleum distillate, immediately I'll go get a migraine. Pure gum turpentine, not a problem at all. In fact, I like the smell of pure gum turpentine because it's a different product and a different process by which that's derived. So even artists distilled turpentine, which is pure gum distilled turpentine, I quite like the smell. But liquid, I've had some issues with that, in particular in confined spaces. So I've always used that with plenty of ventilation, like an extractor fan that's actively bringing fresh air in. So I could be using spray cans in the studio and I wouldn't have smelt it.
Okay.
But now that I'm in the new studio, I don't have an extraction system yet. But what I do have is volume of airspace.
Okay.
So I just... it's just a little bit of poison in a very big area. so I'll have to work on that though. But I'm intrigued by the walnut. I would love to play with that walnut alkyd resin. Does it M. Graham make that? Is that the brand?
Yep. That's the brand. Yep.
Yeah, cool.
So they do both the oil and the alkyd. And
maybe you could bring me some to New Zealand when you come over to New Zealand.
Sounds good. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm going there. And end of December.
Fantastic.
So we'll see. But you were saying something, and I want to ask.
Poisoning myself. Ventilation. What was it about that? Drying time, medium.
Drying time. Shoot.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
It's okay.
I better stop doing that.
No. It was gone. It was gone. It was while you were talking. I forgot. But it was something about your painting process. Maybe this. I saw from some reviews you do a lot of layering as well.
Yes.
Like how do you work your fat over lean and all of that? Like do you work on like thick layers of paint, or is it like very thin layers?
Well, fat on lean is one rule, but you also need to be working slow over fast, thick over thin, flexible over non-flexible. Because as you're building up layers, you're changing the properties of that paint. And so you need to design how you build that painting up. So I did do quite a detailed video on mediums on my YouTube channel in recent months, and that will have all of that information in there. But essentially, when you're working with a product like liquid, Winsor Newton liquid, a lot of those rules do tend to go out the window. Some of them do. I try to still work very, thicker over thinner. So my block-in layer is incredibly thin, and it might be, diluted down with a little bit of pure gum turpentine and a bit of a liquid. But also, I think the issue that a lot of us artists get into is we overuse mediums. We put a little bit too much of the additive in there.
Yeah.
And that's when we get into trouble. Is now you're painting with medium tinted with a bit of color rather than actually using the paint. And that's when you get into yellowing and shifting and cracking even. But with the liquid, I find if I keep it at no more than about 25%, so 3 parts paint to 1 part medium, I'm in a really good zone right there. I try not to go over that ratio, although I have occasionally with things like a dark glaze, with using a product like Liquid Fine Detail. But because it's a darker glaze, if that was going to yellow, you wouldn't detect it at all because it's in a really dark, deep area. So any yellowing, you're not going to be able to measure at all. But
makes sense.
In a lighter glaze, which is always applied as a scumble or a dry brush technique over the top, you're not using much of any medium at all. It's just brushed gently over the surface. So, there's a lot of techniques and there's a lot there to know and kind of navigate. But generally with Liquid, it solves a lot of those problems because it's permanently flexible. So, when you're building those layers, they're isolated and they lock in and they key into that paint. And it forms a stable structure by which to layer upon. And the thing I love about it, because I do a lot of commission work and a lot of it's large, I ship it rolled. So I need to be able to roll these huge canvases up and ship them internationally. And I ship them in PVC tubes. So when I'm doing that, it gives me peace of mind knowing that the Liquid is a really stable structure to bind that oil paint together. Because oil paint, it can be very fragile stuff, especially if you're painting on a floppy canvas, or a linen, and so we got to be mindful about how we put it together. But I do a lot of layering. My layers occur in three different passes: the block-in, modeling, and then detail. And gradually, I'm building it up from there.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, the stretching part is always for me as well. It's like always the, ooh, here we go. It's such a moment, but you learn and it just becomes more easy. And it's actually a quite good way to ship it. Like I found it even safer than just putting a whole crate in it for the finished piece.
Well, Lucas Kratochwil, this has been a fascinating conversation. I love all the topics that we covered in this, and it's going to be one that I'm going to enjoy going back to and listening to again. But thank you so much for joining me on the Creative Endeavor.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Well, I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode of the Creative Endeavor podcast, and a huge thank you to Lucas Kratochwil for joining me. Now, if you want to find more of his work, then those links are in the description down below. Make sure you follow Lucas on Instagram and on his website at lucaskratochwil.com. Now, if you ever want the audio version of this podcast, then those links are down below as well. You can find this on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and Podbean. And of course, if you enjoy these, then click that like button for me and leave me a comment down below. But most important, make sure you subscribe through my website at andrewtischler.com. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you for watching all the way up to this point. I've certainly enjoyed your company, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in another episode of The Creative Endeavor.